gonna
I'm
do
gonna
that.
I'm gonna talk over the theme music a little bit as it.
That's fine.
I like that. I like the
You
the
like that?
seamlessness of it. Yeah.
Well, you're doing it right now.
Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. My name's Tyler Osby,
And I'm Mike Coletta.
and this week we have a game that's near and dear to both of our hearts. A little bit, although I have some hot takes on it.
That's good because I also, after playing it this week for the episode, have some not great news for nostalgia fans. I feel
Yikes.
like
This week we're going to be talking about Pokémon Snap.
that's right. And I did some research on this, but as always, we're going to start with our grime facts. That's our facts that we did. It was named after a person named Grime that made this for us years ago, and that's how we started. So that's what we're doing. So it's developed by HAL Laboratory. There is help. They got assistance from another company, and I feel like it's important to mention that. So PAX Softica, PAXSOFTNICA, also helped with this game. But
Exotica.
yeah, they actually helped. They also helped design like Mother, the game Mother. And so
Is HAL Laboratory involved with Mother? I know they did the
they
Kirby
are,
games,
yeah.
right?
So they're kind of working together, and then Kirby's Dream Land was the big one. We'll
Okay,
talk about it
so
later, but
Earthbound, Kirby, Pokemon Snap, kind of all in the same sort of extended universe.
yeah, in the same vein of these two companies, and it was published by Nintendo. The release dates were Japan first, March 21st, 1999, and then we got North America, July 26th, 1999. It didn't come to Australia and Europe until March 23rd and September 15th, respectively. So that's where those ended up. It is an N64 game. That is the only platform it came out on, which is kind of why we're doing this week, because it's a much simpler version of the episode this week. I was at a wedding all weekend. It was crazy. It was fun. It was nice, but I was busy, so I was typing away. Anyway, the number of copies sold. I have two different things. VG charts told me how many it ships, but we all know VG charts, like, I don't know how vetted that source is, but it shipped 3,630,000 units. And then there was another article I read that said it sold 1.5 million units sold.
Okay.
So I don't know what we should use, shipped or sold, but that's kind of the ballpark of where we're at. It did well. The game did well. The genre or gameplay style, I will describe it as a rail shooter, but photographs. There's no violence in this game, unless you can call hitting Charmeleon in the face with an apple violence. Would you consider that violence?
I mean, technically speaking,
It is
cartoon violence, right?
It's cartoon fun violence. Anyway, fun violence. That's what we want to promote on this podcast.
yeah.
You know, the average time to complete, according to How Long to Beat, is about 4 to 5.5 hours long. But I saw streamers doing it in like 2 hours. So
I bet speedruns are like beat this game in 5 minutes.
Yeah, they probably go really quick. Metacritic score. It does have a Metacritic score for being an N64 game. It's 77 out of 100.
Oh, okay.
So
when did Metacritic come around? Is that's unusual for N64 games?
I
So it must
think
be for
they
later
go
ones.
backwards though and pull scores from other games. I think that's how they do it. I could be wrong on that, but they go back and pull the other like game rankings and stuff and add that into their thing. But so premise wise, what this game's all about is you are hired by Professor Oak of the original Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue games, the originals, right?
Mm-hmm.
To photograph Pokemon using his new invention, the 01. The 01 is just like a little buggy contraption that travels on a rail. I don't know what makes it a new invention. It's just like kind of like a car, but it's new for the game.
I thought we had
guess.
these. I mean, if you go back to Pokemon Legends Arceus, which takes place like 100 years ago or whatever, they probably got this stuff already. I don't think. Sometimes I think Professor Oak is pulling one over on these 10-year-olds.
I do too. I also think it's suspicious that it's just child labor involved in this. You know, it's fun, but you're definitely making Todd Snap go to work. That's
like there's 150 Pokemon. I haven't seen them all. Can you go find them for me? And then you leave town where it's just your mom and Professor Oak.
Yep. And then Professor Oak's just sitting there profiting. You know, he's profiting off of all this. There's some shady characters. This is very Tom Nook behavior. Professor Oak, when you think about it.
I don't think Professor Oak is a good guy.
No, that's what we're saying. So this game is a little different because your job is to use this machine, the 01, to take pictures of Pokemon for Professor Oak's research. you do actually play as a character named Todd Snap. However, I was slightly confused because when you start the game, it has that classic Pokemon, what's your name? And you write it in, and then Professor Oak refers to you as that name the whole time.
Todd Snap.
But Todd Snap is the character's name
Perfect
in
name.
canon. Kind of like, I guess, Ash Ketchum is the name in canon of Red and Blue, right? If you were to go that way. So regardless,
Of the TV show of Pokemon Yellow, of Red and Blue, it's actually Red which is a different character from Ash.
oh,
Red and Blue are different characters from Ash and Gary.
see things I didn't really understand.
They did a whole like 6-episode anime about Red.
Really?
Yeah, I forget exactly what it's called, Pokemon Origins or something like that, where it's it more closely follows a story told in Red and Blue rather than the like anime story, which is like they're similar, but
yeah.
Anyway, they're different. They are different characters.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. All the Pokemon people can stop yelling at their screens.
That's
right
why you
now.
fight Red at the end of Silver, not Ash.
Oh, that would make sense. So, regardless of who you are, Todd Snap, I think we can all agree, is a great name for a photographer. So it's one of those things.
Sure.
It's like it's fine. So we can all agree on that. So that's the basic premise. Now, you play the course gameplay wise. It's a rail shooter. This is like almost like Time Crisis, but with a photography, right? So instead of shooting bad guys, you're just taking pictures of Pokemon and they walk across the screen. They're doing adorable things. It's really cute. It's a cute game. You start only being able to take pictures of these characters, but then you can take 60 pictures in a run total. You have a film roll of 60 pictures before it maxes out, right? And that's kind of a lot. Like I barely,
just like in the 90s.
Yeah, right. I barely.
Actually, that was a lot for the 90s because I feel like a roll of film usually had like 30 on it, maybe.
Yeah, probably. It's probably right. But I barely used like 20 pictures a run because I was really trying to get the pictures the first time. And every time you take a picture of a Pokemon, you get a score at the end of it from Professor Oak. And the pose of the Pokemon, the size of the Pokemon in frame, and the technique, and technique just means whether or not the Pokemon is in the center or not, which is funny because I feel like now people in photography would say it's better for it to not be in the center, but I don't know photography.
It depends. Are you taking an art photo or are you taking like a scientific photo? Maybe it doesn't matter.
So if this is scientific, then it's probably in the middle, but they give you a score on that, and you can pick for every picture you take of different Pokemon. Say you have 4 pictures of Pikachu. You got to pick the best one of Pikachu, and that's the one that you submit to Professor Oak. And you do that for every Pokemon you took pictures of in the selection screen. So one of the cool things about this, though, is they actually save the photos so you can look at them later, which I thought was pretty neat, that you could actually go back and look at your photos. And then when you get a score on a photo that's better than the previous score of that same Pokemon, it'll just replace it for you. So you're kind of trying to get the score. And the score is actually how you progress. Like when your score gets higher, you unlock new courses and you unlock new items. And I think this is probably what people mostly remember about the game is the way you can manipulate the environment to get different pictures of Pokemon using these items. So there's technically 4 unlockable items. I messed up and only listed 3 of them here, but the 4 are Pokemon food, which just looks kind of like an apple. The Pester Ball, which is designed to like make Pokemon come out of the environment. Like if they're hiding, you can knock them out of it. And
kind of makes them angry too, I think, if you hit them with it.
Yeah, and then also the Poke Flute, which I mean it wakes up Snorlax, spoilers, and all that kind of stuff. But the Poke Flute does different things and makes Pokemon act differently. The one I forgot to add isn't really a feature. It kind of is it kind of just makes your life a little easier later in the game. Professor Oak gives you an item that lets you move the buggy faster. So if you're trying to get to a particular moment, you can like skip around.
When you're like, when you've done this level before and you're like, just get me to the end so I can take a picture of Blastoise.
Exactly. I'm just trying to get Vileplume, man. Let me get to the end. So that is like, that's to me what I remembered the most about this game, because one of the cool things you can do, and I actually remembered this when I was playing it again, is you can hit Charmeleon into the lava pit with an apple, and then he evolves into Charizard. So
I remember that too.
There's your spoiler to a 26-year-old game, everybody. Sorry about that.
It's probably the only thing I remember about that game. Because I remember, I don't know if I figured out, maybe it was probably in an issue of Nintendo Power where they were like, if you knock Charmeleon into the lava pit, it turns into a Charizard. And I was like, oh, that's amazing.
And I'm going to tell you right now, that's not the only Pokemon you knock into a pit to make it evolve into something else too. There's other ones that do that. It's a very common thing. So There are 7 levels: beach, tunnel, volcano, river, cave, valley, and then the final special level, rainbow cloud. You have to replay the levels multiple times to unlock different things. And I think this game's lasting appeal isn't from it being like a long game or a fun game, but the magic from it came from, like, as a kid, this was the first time we got to see Pokemon in 3D,
That was
right?
it. If
It,
this game released anytime after Pokemon Stadium, it would have been a nothing game.
yeah, and that Pokemon Stadium released 7 months after the game Pokemon Snap came out. So, it was pretty close. They were kind of pretty close. So, I'm glad they got the timing they had. There were also buttons in levels too that you can hit to unlock secret areas. These buttons are usually unlocked by using your items to get Pokemon to like hit the button. And then the final course, the Rainbow Cloud level, is unlocked by finding these things called Pokemon signs throughout the other courses. And these are just structures in the levels that look like Pokemon. So there are hills that look like Doug Trio in one level, and there's rocks that when you look at them from a certain angle, they look like a Kingler. And you want to take pictures of those signs. And each one of the
Oh,
levels has one sign in it.
I kind of remember that now.
Yeah, that's kind of something that I forgot about. And I was like, oh, yeah, this was a part of it too, that you could like take a picture of these signs and then like go through and see everything. So the final level is the closest you're going to get to any sort of boss fight. And I am using that term extremely loosely here because you essentially want to break Mew's shield using the different items you've unlocked throughout the game so you can take the picture. The game is actually like fairly short. You know, I mentioned before how the speedrunners like beat it in like an hour or two, but as a kid, I remember playing it. It took me like days because I didn't look at guides. I just wanted to try to figure it out and like get the high score. And honestly, if you've never played this game before, I would say do that. That would bring you enjoyment.
Yeah, that's the way to do it now. Because if you're just like speed running through it to like, I want the experience, I'm gonna follow a guide and like I'm just trying to get through it so I can say I got through it. Like you're kind of doing it wrong. Because my hot take, game's not very good.
Yeah, it's that. We'll get to our takes in the end.
Okay.
Okay, I don't want you to get
No,
all.
spoiler for my hot take.
Yeah, I know. I have things to say too, but well, so we're gonna get to the development history section of the game, and this is going to be not really a linear story for development history. I try to make it linear as many times as I can, but for this one, I could not because the sources I use don't lay things out very clearly. In fact, there's going to be a lot of times in the next 10 to 15 minutes I'm talking about this development history that you're all going to say, what did they do? And I'll be like, I don't know, because we don't know. So we're just going to kind of go for the general consensus. So the first source I'm looking at is from Nintendo World Report. It was from January 9th, 2017, and it was called Know Your Nintendo Developers Pokemon Snap. So HAL Laboratory is a studio that if you are a Nintendo fan, you probably know very well. They created games like Earthbound and Kirby's Dream Land. They also, and I didn't write this in there, but they were a part of this first Smash Brothers as well, Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah, I think they helped with Smash Brothers, and maybe well, that's probably why Kirby and that's probably why Ness is in there to be honest, because Earthbound was dead game by the time Smash Bros came
Mm-hmm.
out.
Yeah, and so I am still unsure of this if HAL Lab is a branch of Nintendo or if they were working alongside Nintendo or
I
if
think
it's
I think
one
they're
of
one
the
of those second party
subsidiaries.
developers, like when Rare was sort of owned by Nintendo. I
Okay.
think it's that sort of situation where it's like they're technically independent, but they're owned enough by Nintendo that they only make Nintendo games.
Okay. Because, yeah, I will say that at the time that this was made, um, Satoru Iwata was like the president of HAL or the lead at HAL during this game, right? And then he would later go on to work at Nintendo. So it was kind of hard for me to determine exactly how that turned out there for this. But I will keep going and just go from there. So the HAL had been actually working on games for the NES since the 1980s. Their first Nintendo 64 project actually never ended up coming out, and that was Simcopter 64. It was abandoned after a brief
Oh.
showing at E3 in 1997, and they kind of showed it as a demo. Wasn't a lot of hype around it, and then it just kind of disappeared. But then the next game HAL Laboratories made was just a photography game. There was actually no Pokemon at all in it initially. And here's the quote from the article that I'm going to read about this. Quote, what would later become their first Nintendo 64 release was developed as a 64DD title focused on taking pictures. Originally, Pokemon Snap wasn't a Pokemon game, but rather a normal game in which you took photos. Iwata said in an Iwata Asks for Kirby's Epic Yarn, quote, the motivation for playing the game wasn't clear, and later on, we made a somewhat forced switch to taking pictures of Pokemon.
Oh, I like that. The motivation wasn't clear. Like, so, but why play this game though? And somebody was like, what if we put Pokemon in it? Oh,
Yeah, dude.
that's why people will
You,
play anything with Pokemon in it.
you're pretty much nailing what happened during development. And I found a really different source coming up that like didn't really go into details of it, but was essentially that. So, as I said in the quote there, the game was meant to be on the 64DD, which is a disk drive. That's the 64 disk drive, is what that stands for. We've talked about it a little bit on the podcast, but it was essentially a piece of hardware that played discs on the N64. It only came out in Japan and it did not do well there. So it was abandoned because of that. According to a Kotaku article I found called Pokemon Weren't Originally in Pokemon Snap, this came out in 2010, the change over to Pokemon was not exactly welcomed by the team either. Here's a quote from the game designer Masanobu Yamamoto, which is game designer Masanobu Yamamoto was working on Pokemon Snap, and he initially had a negative reaction to the addition of Pokemon because the characters replaced what he was working on. That time, adopting the Pokemon world clarified what we should do and the direction we should head, Yamamoto adds. And I came to like Pokemon, so I felt like it had saved us, end quote. So at first, not that great. Later on, became better, right? Like this, it wasn't welcomed at first, though, even though this is what probably saved the game, is that it became a Pokemon game. We talked about games that were like reskinned. It's pretty famous that Mario 2 is like that. But in this situation, I think making Pokemon Snap a Pokemon Snap game is what saved it, right? Like it helped it. It didn't hurt because we're going to find out later on there was really no direction with this for a very specific reason. So, do you have any questions, Tyler, while I pause right here?
No, this all
Okay.
makes a lot of sense to me. I feel like the game definitely was probably not very strong on its own. And they were like, well, what can we do to make this a little bit more exciting for people? Let's make it about taking pictures of
Let's
Pokemon.
add cute little pocket monsters that everyone loves. That's
Yep.
what the choice was made. So, we're going to now talk about this is like probably the most famous fact is that the game that it was called before was, and the team, it was just called Jack and the Beanstalk. And this is a straight up fairy tale game about Jack and the Beanstalk. Now, there are elements of this game that were added to Pokemon Snap, but what those elements are, we will never know. They are not clarified in any of the articles I read, and I couldn't find it anywhere.
If I had to guess, I would guess it's like a lot of the environmental interaction stuff. I'm thinking like, they probably could make beanstalks grow or like do magical fairy tale stuff by throwing things or whatever the plan was in the original game. That probably morphed into the environmental stuff they could do with Pokemon, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about there is I think it's actually coming up right here too, because there's another article on a website called Unseen 64, which to be fair, like seems more like a fan blog, but they did cite articles and what they were talking about. It's good. It's a good website. So, and they actually state that, and this is what we know for a fact why they're connected. And I can confirm it because I saw it when I played it. But in the opening credits for Pokemon Snap, you see a credit given to Jack and Beans, and that is the team from Jack and the Beanstalk. But again, we don't know what they did. If they just full on made it, it seems like they did because we'll talk about it in a later interview. But essentially, Jack and Beans was working on this game, and then they were the ones that just essentially fully went into Pokemon. They're called the Jack team in the other interview I have here, which is really cool, but we'll get to that in a moment. And in the opening cinematic, I don't know if I talked about that when you're in the game and playing it. You actually see Todd Snap trying to take a picture of Mew, and every picture he takes is just like the tail or the leg sticking out. And that's when the Jack and Beans in big bold white text appears on the screen. So it's clearly a connection. We just don't know what it is, and we don't even know what the game looked like before it was Pokemon focused because when this was announced, Jack and the Beanstalk, it was announced in 1995, I believe, as being something that was being worked on. There were no screenshots, no pictures, no media, nothing. It seems like Jack and the Beanstalk, the game, was completely lost to time. That's just gone, which happens with
That's a
these
bummer.
older games. Yeah, it's kind of a bummer, but
it'll be fun if somebody ever digs up like an old cartridge of like super prototype Jack and Beanstalk game. That'd be cool.
yeah, it would be neat. So um, that article is titled Jack and the Beanstalk N64DD canceled. So this is an article not even about Pokemon Snap, just about Jack and Beanstalk. And they have a little like aside in it that I kind of wanted to talk about because I didn't know this, but apparently there was another canceled N64 game that was Earthbound 64. Did you know there was an Earthbound 64? That was
I did
canceled?
not. That makes a lot of sense why Hal would want to put Ness into Smash Bros to sort of seed that, because we've seen that happen with Smash Bros specifically, where like certain characters will come to Smash Bros and then it's like a few months later, oh, their game is coming to Switch or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
Because I
So
think Joker was in from Persona 5 was in Smash Bros Ultimate like before they announced Persona 5 was coming to Switch.
oh, that's really cool. I didn't know that. That's a good connection. So now people are going to frantically look at Super Smash Brothers lineups and see if there's a new thing coming in. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, I think they've been doing it for years.
Yeah, you're not the first one to find that out. But so they think that Jack and the Beanstalk might have been used for that canceled Earthbound 64 game. But again, that's another show. Like, I kind of want to do a show on canceled N64 games because I think it'd be cool. But like, I feel like I worry it's going to be a lot like this, where I'm like, and they said that happened. And that's it because we don't have pictures.
The game didn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if it's really a good podcast, but Pokemon Snap does exist. So as I said, Hal wasn't alone in developing this game, though. They had that other small studio I mentioned up top, Pax Softnica, and they're credited with assisting them. Pax Softnica is known for primarily making the Japan-only releases in the 1990s. Their most famous game was Mother, which is known as Earthbound Beginnings in North America. It's a prequel to Earthbound. Again, I wasn't really sure what Pax Softnica did to assist them. I just know they were there and they worked together, and it's been confirmed that they worked together. So that's kind of it. But arguably, and the source I've been like waiting to get to this whole time because I found it, it's a 5-part interview on a website called, and I don't know if you've heard of this or not, Tyler. It's called Hobonishi's Treetop Secret Base. And
I am not familiar.
Hobonichi is a newspaper in Japan that has a very close relationship with Nintendo. And they do this Treetop Secret Base is actually a kind of a place they do long form interviews with people from Nintendo. And they happen to have a long form interview about the development of Pokemon Snap. Now, the newspaper is really cool. But the only issue I had with it is that it's entirely in Japanese.
Well, that'll make it tough.
I used Google Chrome's built-in translator for this to figure it out. And so sometimes the quotes don't make sense. I clean them up. I am trying to get what they want to say. So this is not very like history forward, but like Tyler and I mentioned when we started this podcast, it's not designed to be like a history paper that we credit and cite every single thing we say. We're just trying our best here.
We're just two buddies talking about video games.
Yeah, exactly. So there's some general points I'm going to highlight that I could glean from the article, but there's also some quotes I'm going to say that I very much these are paraphrased because I don't trust Google Translate. I am copy pasting what Google Translate did for their quotes, like what they said in the quote, but I don't know how much of that is lost in translation. So I would just say take everything I'm about to say with a huge grain of salt. Does that sound good, Tyler? Does that work?
That sounds great. I'm okay. Into that.
And maybe someone else knows more about this newspaper, but I would love to hear more about it. I'm sure maybe people would know. I always reference Matt in Japan just because he's in Japan, but maybe he can help me out with explaining what's going on with it. You know, I feel like I always give Matt homework every time we do this episodes. I'm just like, here, Matt,
sorry,
you do
Matt.
this.
You don't have to do it if you don't want to. Nobody's getting.
You really don't.
Here, so
yeah, no one gets paid here, including us. Contrary to what people think, no one's getting paid here. So Pokemon Snap development. So here's the points that I found out. So we're just gonna start the first point from this article. It's actually a 5-part interview. The first point I gathered is that Pokemon Snap development before it was officially a Pokemon game was a nightmare. Apparently, they had 4 months or 4 big moments where people working on the Jack and Beans team just quit or left or moved on to another job. Developers at HAL Laboratories were very concerned that taking pictures wouldn't be enough to be a game. So they wanted to make sure they had more to it than that. And that's kind of a reason that this took so long. In general, at Nintendo and other development studios at this time, between the 16 and 64-bit generations, this was considered a rough time. There was a lot of worry in the going on with what the state of the video game industry was. And in the article, this is like an exchange between the editorial department of the newspaper and Shigeru Miyamoto. So the editorial department says, at that time, were you saying that even though Mr. Miyamoto was making a lot of games to be compatible with new hardware, he still had a strong sense of crisis? And then Miyamoto jumps in and says, that's right, I was strong. And so was President Yamauchi at the same time. I thought it would be interesting to have at least one project in the 64 development line that involves long-term investment. So it seems like this was kind of a idea that came out of desperation. Like, we're going to make this new studio, Jack and Beans, and we're going to take a long time to figure out something new. That's not Mario or Zelda or, Mario Kart, like something brand new. The staff, this is the part that also caused the length of development to be so crazy. Development was 3.5 years at this time, which is pretty long.
Pretty long
for a 64 game.
Especially considering how kind of small the game is, I guess.
Yeah. It was a long development time. The staff was actually all recruited through advertisements. So like newspaper advertisements. That's how they assembled the Jack and Beans
Tokyo
team.
Craigslist.
Yeah. So they pulled people from all different fields, like not video gaming. And that's kind of what made another aspect of this a little different. So the three people mainly involved in the project, the three big producers, are Shigeru Miyamoto, Satoru Iwata, and I have never said this name before, and I always butcher the Japanese language, and I'm so sorry, but I'm just going to go for it. Shigesato Itoi, who is a very interesting person. Yeah, I try my best. Matt always helps me out and corrects me afterwards. So the next time we talk about this person, hopefully I won't mess up their name. But this person, though, Shigesato Itoi, was really kind of a jack of all trades. Like, they worked on this newspaper that interviewed them, but they also worked on games as well. So, and they even developed their own bass fishing game in the 90s with Nintendo. So,
wow, it sounds like you got to pick up this game.
Yeah, I know, right? This is
fishing.
I know my fishing game senses were peaked, but I don't know if I can find it. I'm sure I can find it. If it's for 64, I can find it. So, but therefore, this is what the team did, because their idea was they wanted Jack and Beans to be collective development. Like, there are no bosses, there are no leaders. We want it to be a shared thing. So very purposefully, the three of them overloaded themselves with other work so they wouldn't meddle in the Jack and Beans team's business. Essentially, this whole article, the 5-part interview, is almost entirely about development, design, and style, more than Pokemon Snap's history.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and about how they did this intentionally. And they thought that maybe what would happen, like as an experiment, is they'll do this and then maybe some leader, like a leader, will just come up naturally to take over with the group. That never happened. So that's why the game kind of got lost in development for 3.5 years before it eventually became a Pokemon game. Is it just kind of sat in this limbo where people were leaving and joining the team, and they didn't want to mess in the affairs, and it kind of just took a long time to go through. What
are we working on? Why are we working on it? We don't have a release date. Is there a release date? What is even the point of this thing we're making?
Yeah. And that's kind of the general thing that's surrounding this whole article, is that, and the article itself is like the interview on the left with them on the website with the three main producers, and then on the right they have little blurbs from different people on the design team. And I have some of those blurbs here I'm going to read in a bit, but it's really interesting to see, like, okay, this was the plan the producers had, where we're going to go ahead and make these things happen. And then on the right, the design team was like, this is how it really happened. Essentially, this kind of caused a problem initially, as we figured as much, right? Because Satoru Iwata says in the interview, actually, there are about 4 times during the process that I thought, quote, if this doesn't work, I'll have no choice but to fold the project. Which is,
Yikes. Just like Hail Marys, like, gosh, I hope this
yeah.
works. Cross your fingers.
Yeah, and this is a pretty long quote from Iwata, but I think it represents the teamwork that made the game happen. And bear in mind, this is Google Translate, as I said before. It's not 100% accurate, but I think the sentiment is there. So that's why I'm reading it on the podcast. But this is when Iwata asked at what times did he think that the project would fold. He said, quote, even within a team, a very important key person may have left the team midway through, and many team members may have shut themselves into their own responsibilities, developed negative thinking, and not been able to do much. Sometimes you run out of time, or even though the deadline you set as a goal is approaching, the overall pace doesn't seem to be picking up. That's the time. There have been about 4 times in the past 3.5 years that I've wondered if this team would fall apart in the air. For me, at that time, I took all the steps I think I could think of and said, this is the only option I have. And the results somehow led to positive direction and a solution to the problem. I was able to overcome what I was dealing with at the time. And as a result, I was able to reach my goal now. Well, then this is the editor saying, well, you've walked the tightrope. And then he goes on to say, that's what I feel like. This can be said for almost all of us, but at one time or another, we felt like we had lost our desire to develop or were in a variety of unhealthy states. We encouraged each other as a team, and we borrowed strength from outside the team to do something. That's how I managed to reach the goal. End
Dang.
quote.
Sounds like they had a bad time.
This is about a Pokemon game where you take pictures of cute animals. That's what like stood out to me about all these quotes, is this like talking about how it was like this do or die time where our team's falling apart, we're really working hard, and the project we're left with is one of the cutest games on the N64.
If there's one thing that I have learned working adjacent to video game development, it's that making video games is hard, man. It's really hard.
Yeah, it is. It's so hard, and it's just that I was really excited when I found this, because I went into this episode thinking we're going to talk about a cute gun, get a little fun game with Pokemon that you take pictures of, and it's really sweet, right? And what I ended up with was, wow, this was like a development nightmare, which not where I thought this was going. So when things started to click later in development, it really felt like the collective process Miyamoto, Iwata, and Itoi imagined. Like, here's a quote from the designer Takeyuki Mashida. Quote, I guess it wasn't until Pokemon Snap started that the team started to turn in the right direction. Everyone got on the same playing field and had fun trying to figure out what kind of food they would make when it came to the placement of Pokemon and other aspects related to the gameplay. I made a number of suggestions from terrain design side, and I was in charge of such as where I wanted them to be placed. Again, sorry with the Google Translate here. On the other hand, I was sometimes told I want to put Pokemon here, so please redesign the terrain to match that. And we were finally able to have meaningful exchanges. So I think they take this as like, hey, we're building this game and people are criticizing me, but we're still okay and we're working together and we're changing things and making it work. That's kind of what I gathered from that.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But here's the quote that I identified with the most, and this is like the one we're going to end on as far as quotes go before we get into like our own thoughts on the game, where you get to tear it apart, Tyler, because I can tell you're chomping at the bit. Just tear apart Pokemon. This is from another designer, Masanobu Yamamoto. Quote, for example, it's the same at Disneyland. When you're on a ride, what's shown next is all about course design. It's a job that doesn't stand out. But I thought the most interesting thing about it was thinking about how to show things like this and how to show them that way. So I started doing terrain design, end quote. And I think the metaphor of Disneyland is the best way to describe Pokemon Snap. What do you think?
I love that metaphor. That's really great. And it kind of makes me appreciate it a little bit differently. I don't want to say more, but differently in the sense of like, oh, they're designing theme park rides. Mm-hmm. That is totally what it is. It's definitely a theme park ride that you're encouraged to take photos on. Like that's kind of it. And you're playing like a little bit interactive, which is very cool.
Yeah, you're playing an on-the-rail theme park ride where you can take pictures and throw things. That's pretty much it.
Imagine if you could throw pester balls at the pirates on Pirates of the Caribbean. That's what you're doing in Pokemon Snap. And then take pictures of how they react.
I think that would be a better ride. personally.
I think you're right.
Maybe we found something here. You know when Johnny Depp sometimes surprises people on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride?
Yep.
Imagine if someone threw an apple at him. That would be better. That would make it way better, I think, for
Yeah.
everyone involved. So this interview in Hobonichi's Treetop Secret Base is like more of a discussion about design, as I mentioned. It's like design philosophy with the Jack and Beans team versus the actual development of Pokemon Snap. Like they never really get into distinct problems that they had. They just kind of mentioned people left or people came back or we didn't know where we're going. But that design philosophy gave this team room to explore what they could do with the N64, and that's kind of how we have this game. Is this was like a game that came out of experimentation and messing with different ways to do the video game medium, and with that, like they made a game that was very popular and very fun at the time. You know, I'm not saying at the time to be insulting, but this game is like far from perfect, as we explained, but it was a good game back then. And honestly, if you have like kids or something and you want to get them to play a video game, this would be a great game for them to play because I think that's
Yeah,
kind of
it's
what this
probably a
is
good
about.
like kid game too, because it's like it's very controlled. It's on rails, so they only really have to worry about one thing. Yeah, okay. There's value there, I suppose.
Yeah, but with that though, that's kind of the end of our development section. So it's like very much this was an experiment of collective game development. It took a very long time, but they added Pokemon to it at the end and they made it work. Now, I have very fond memories of this game, but playing it in 2023 made me realize how limited this game is. And I don't think it's a bad thing, but it's just different than as I remember. I didn't beat the game. Like I played some of the levels, but I was just like, okay, I maybe put like an hour and a half into it, which makes it so it's like honestly like I got halfway through the game realistically. This doesn't really hold up to me as something that piques my interest, but I did play it. The most frustrating thing for me as a person playing this game in 2023, and we've talked about it before with games, and it's very common with older games, is that defaults to an inverted y-axis, and that's just something I forgot older games always did.
The
And
only
then
time that's acceptable is in Star Fox 64 or games like that. That's the
or
only time
flight
I'll play.
games, like
Yeah,
flying
flight
games.
games when you're that's the only time I'll accept an inverted joystick. I'm not. I knew people that played Halo like with the right stick inverted.
No,
Mm-mm.
this is what flying is to me, by the way, is this motion.
Yeah, that's a
You
yeah.
fly.
People do that. Well, you
You
do that a lot
fly.
in Star Fox.
You do that a lot. You do a barrel roll. It's fun. But so with that, I'm gonna say that like it's cool how you can like get the Pokemon to react to their environment in different ways. Like things that are good about it to me is like it still looks good for an N64 game. Like it's doing the best it can. Like the Pokemon models are really cute still, even though they're not that great as far as graphics goes. They still are adorable and it gets the point across. So this game is pretty important to like a lot of people, not only as fans, but just based on the fact that they did like a 5-part interview about it. I really think this game was important to like developers as well. Like Miyamoto and Iwata, if they spent that much time talking about this game, it must have been pretty important to them at the time. And you could tell they did something new with development. It took a long time to get there, 3.5 years, but they finally did get there and they made a finished product. So, Tyler, what do you think about this game? What are your
My
thoughts? I want you to roast it. I'm ready. I'm ready for the roasting.
my light just went out over here. I have a bunch of things just fell down over here. My room is falling apart here. My take on Pokemon Snap is that the game is fine. It is inoffensive in the sense that it's like it's not bad. Like it sets out to do a thing, and it does it. I kind of find taking pictures of Pokemon on rails to be sort of boring. And I did play this game back in the day. I think the reason that it has the staying power that it has today, or the reason people are still talking about it, is because, like you said at the top, it was the first time we saw Pokemon in 3D on the Nintendo 64. I think if this game came out anytime after Pokemon Stadium, it flops. It does almost nothing. Because I bought this game specifically for that reason, and I played the crap out of it. Because when you're a kid, you play the crap out of every game that you have.
Me too.
Because you don't have that many games, and I don't know, you're just like your brain is more open to like the experiences of things. You know what I mean? It just finds the fun where there's not fun. Because it's like when you go back to play old games, you're like, how did I ever find this fun? Like kid brain can find fun.
Yeah.
That's why. So like, I don't think it holds up very well. I think I didn't play the new Pokemon Snap.
I haven't either. I have a little. That's like my tidbit at the end. We
Yeah.
can talk about it now if you want.
That might be a better game. I don't know. But that's my take, is that the reason that everybody bought this game because they wanted to see Pokemon in 3D, and we all played it because we were kids, because it is people of like our age who played it as kids that find it nostalgic today, right? We played the crap out of it as kids because we all bought it, we all talked about it, so it like sort of like entered culture, right? But it wasn't, the game's not very good. It's not like, why play that over literally anything else, right?
Yeah,
It's because it has Pokemon in it. If it was this Jack and Beans game, nobody would have bought it, because the Pokemon part is the only interesting thing this game has going for it. That's my hot take. If you had fun playing this game, you loved it, that's fine. I'm not yucking your yum. I just didn't like it myself. I just don't think it's that great.
Yep. You pretty much just nailed what I said. Also, I looked into the new game, the new Pokemon Snap game, because I don't know anything about it. I didn't watch anything about it when it came out in 2021. I was like, oh, this is neat. They're making a new Pokemon Snap, but I don't know if I'm going to buy it, yada, yada, yada. I thought they would take it off rails and make it more like a safari where you're in a vehicle that you can drive and then take pictures of.
That would have been
but
cool.
They didn't. It's just on a rail. It's just more things you can do to interact with the environment, but it's still very much on a rail. And not for me. Maybe if it goes on sale and it's like $10, I will pick it up just to try it. But
just to check it out,
I don't think the new Pokemon Snap. Although the interesting thing about it to me the most is it's made by Bandai Namco. It's not made by Nintendo.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so even they farmed it out.
Yeah, it's Bandai Namco and the Pokemon Company, like a collaboration between them. Also, Todd Snap makes an appearance. He does show up apparently.
Oh, okay, great.
So they do a traditional throwback to the old one.
We love it.
We do love it. We do love that for Todd Snap. But with that, Tyler, what you been playing?
This week, I've been playing a little bit of Black Ops 2. I'm still kind of like slowly going through my Call of Duty backlog. A little bit more Baldur's Gate with my SO. I feel like there was something else that I was.
You're playing Sea of Stars, right?
Yeah, I haven't touched that in a little while, so I'm hesitant to talk about it this week. I kind of fell off of that. I need to get back into it.
Ooh, the Sea of Stars train.
There was one other game that I was going to talk about that I'm. The Ever Crisis, Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, the mobile game, it's mobile game. It's just monetized, just straight. It's bad, really bad, like truly awful gotcha monetization. Like it's just, I haven't hit the wall yet where I felt like I need to pay, but I can tell it's coming. But the one thing this one does have going for it is it's sort of drip feeding you the storyline of like the greatest hits of Final Fantasy VII story, Crisis Core, and the battle royale that they made a couple years ago called The First Soldier.
I didn't even know they made a battle royale for Final Fantasy.
It was for mobile, and they shut it down like a year later. It was fun. It was okay. I mean, it was kind of fun, but it was mobile battle royale.
I would love to talk about that someday. It's really interesting to talk about a battle royale game that's not. I wouldn't expect a Final Fantasy battle royale.
Yeah,
game.
And it actually has some
and
like
mobile?
important story things in it. I think. So they're sort of incorporating those story beats into Ever Crisis, and then I assume they'll eventually get to maybe they'll do some Advent Children stuff. I hope they get to doing Dirge of Cerberus. Like they are going to do Before Crisis, which was a game that came out only on like flip phones in Japan in like 2004. That story had been told in the US or anywhere else besides those flip phones. So they are going to start doing that. That's not in the game yet. I haven't reached the end of the story that they currently have, but they sort of send you back and forth between Final Fantasy VII, Crisis Core, and The First Soldier. Like you don't just like play through all of one and then do another. Like you kind of have to go back and forth to unlock the other story stuff. There's all kinds of like equipment and enhancements and 5 stars and legendary rarities and like all of that kind of stuff, which is not super fun. I haven't hit the paywall yet, so it's fine so far, but I'm sure there's a point where you paywall and you go, oh, I can grind for a week, or I can just pay $5 right now and have enough to do the next mission. And I will fall off then because I am pretty sensitive to feeling manipulated in those kinds of things. So,
dude, actually, weirdly enough, I started playing Pokemon Go while I was at this wedding again this weekend.
Oh,
so
nice.
I think mobile games for me are out of desperation. Like if I don't pack my Switch, or if I don't bring my if I forget my mouse for my laptop and I can't play a game, I'm like, well, breaking out Pokemon Go again.
There's good stuff on the Apple Arcade too, man. Like Oceanhorn is awesome. Fantasian is, if you're a JRPG fan, Fantasian is really, really good, and it's just stuck on Apple Arcade. I think it'll probably get a port elsewhere soon, but there's lots of good stuff on there. Like, and with the iPhone 15, Apple's making this big push of like, it's the best game console you can buy, which I find very interesting. I know they've sort of made pushes into gaming before and then sort of pulled back or like not really backed it up. So, I mean, I always hope, you know me and my thoughts on the only other company that could actually get into console gaming is Apple, and they already have it with the Apple TV.
Oh
But
yeah, I
anyway,
know.
that's a whole nother
Everyone,
conversation.
I mean, I feel like people don't know how like you're very team Apple, I think, for this, and you're selling it for me. And I've actually been seeing more commercials for Apple Arcade over the
Yeah,
last like month. Like they've kind of like up their advertising, like on YouTube and stuff like that. I see, or Hulu, I see them a lot
yeah.
too,
They
and
need
I'm
to
like,
get a
oh,
big exclusive. They need to like buy Nintendo or something. Which is what Microsoft wants to do in their leaked emails.
mm-hmm.
But they need to do something big where it's like, because like you can play Resident Evil Village on iPhone now or whenever it comes out. It's like it exists, right? It's like that's pretty cool. But that game's like, I don't know, Resident Evil Village, a couple of years old now, probably at least a year old. Like
Yeah,
it's not like it's cool from a technical perspective. I don't know if it's actually like people want to do that, but like what they need to get is like Resident Evil 9. Only way to play it is on your Apple TV or your iPad or your Mac or your iPhone. Anyway, it's just
yeah.
Codex
Honestly,
history of Apple gaming.
I think I would draw the line at Microsoft buying Nintendo. That's for me. I wouldn't want to let that happen. I don't
I
want
don't
that to
think the
happen.
FTC would let it happen
I don't
either.
think they would let it happen either, but I wouldn't be happy about that. Like buying a software studio is one thing, but buying a studio that makes hardware is an entirely
Yeah.
different
Yeah,
thing.
the government in Japan would never let it happen. Like there's just like that's the thing. I feel bad for the folks that got all their emails and stuff leaked in this Microsoft court thing because like these are just like, as far as I can tell, these are just emails between like, yeah, wouldn't it be neat if we bought Nintendo? And
Yeah.
folks like, yeah, it would be pretty neat if we bought Nintendo. And now it's like a million articles that are like, Microsoft wants to buy Nintendo, and it's like, okay,
Okay, take it easy. Yeah.
my camera just froze. It turned off.
It
So
did, and it froze at an
in like,
amazing time.
yeah,
And
I'm gonna try to turn it off and on again, I guess.
I mean, honestly, I would have been fine with you just leaving it there the whole time,
I
but
think
that's
it
pretty great.
overheated.
While that happens, I'm going to talk about my what I've been playing this week, and it's pretty slim. I've really only just played Starfield this week, and other than Pokemon Snap, but I played Pokemon Snap and I played Starfield. Oh, you're back! Look
I'm
at you.
back.
Hey. And I'm not editing that. I'm going to leave it in because
That's
it
fine.
really it froze on a funny face where you're like, ah, so it was good. But I did finally make a ship in Starfield. I took the time to like make the ship and stuff, and that's kind of cool. Very confusing, but I'm following some guides. I think my big complaint with Starfield is they did a horrible job explaining things. Like
Mhm.
it's and I understand that the game is vast and it's huge and you have all these systems, but there should at least be tutorials or something I can look at because I have to go on the internet for everything to figure it out. And I just don't think it's a good idea or a good way to do it. Maybe they thought that. Maybe like, well, it's fine. People can just go online and look at a guide. I'm like,
Yeah, or they're like, modders will fix it for us.
yeah, or like the maps. There's no map. It's just really weird. But I'm having a good time with it. I don't think I'm gonna really like. I don't feel that Skyrim push like I had when Skyrim came out, but
Mhm.
I am still enjoying it myself. And it's Game Pass, so
Yeah.
it's like it's free, but it's not. So
You pay for all these free games.
yeah, but there's other games I'm looking forward to coming up, so I'm excited about that. And I do want to make another playthrough on Baldur's Gate 3 because I want to play a monk because my second or third D&D character I ever made was a monk and it's really fun. So I
Mm,
want to see how they do. And I heard they're kind of overpowered in Baldur's Gate 3 as well.
nice.
You can take like 4 actions or something. It's crazy. But
Oh, that's
I
cool.
mean, yeah, it's pretty good. We're not going to do emails today. We have emails to read, but I kind of want to save them for a mailbag episode in the future. And then also things you can do to support us. You can tell your friends about us. That'd be really helpful. That's a really good way to help us out. You can review our podcast on like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen. That's also very helpful for us. That helps us out tremendously. Or you can follow us on YouTube because we're on YouTube now. That's pretty neat. Well,
Yeah, with
we were
video and
always,
everything.
yeah, we were always on YouTube. We just never did video. So that's like, hey, look at us catching up 5 years later. And and then we can also go to codexpodcast.net. That's the website I made for us. It's got all our links on there to everything you could ever want to see. Our Discord links on there. You could join our Discord. We'd love to have you there. It's really fun. And then with that, though, Tyler, do you want to say bye to everybody?
Goodbye, everybody.